we just discovered that we were drifting dangerously close to the coral reef called the Devil's Backbone. And so Jim barks at me that we had to get off the boat now. Yeah, you bark. Anyway, and so now we're trying to get everything together. We had to take the dinghy off the bow of the boat and bring it along to the side, and now we're trying to get everything in there that we need to. We're trying to affix the motor to the dinghy. So that's where I'm taking it from. All right, so please come in. No, leave the door open. All right, we had to attach the outboard motor, and it was still on the deck. Jim had tied a line to the motor and wrapped it around a winch that would carry most of its weight. My job was to slowly lower the motor onto the dinghy. Jim would then grab it and affix it to its mount. With the seas continuing to toss around, it was difficult to coordinate the handoff. This is why they tell you not to look up while you're reading. Right, immediately. I lowered it bit by bit until it was at arm's length. Jim reached out to get a hold of it and told me to release the motor. As I did so, I did it again. The dinghy was thrown against the side of Sonio by a huge swell. The blades of the propeller knocked into Jim's forehead, and he was momentarily dazed. Blood began to flow from the gash it had left. I wasn't sure how badly he was hurt, but there was blood everywhere, dripping down his face and into his mouth. "Oh my God, Jim, are you all right? Your head, you cut your head." After the initial shock and pain subsided, Jim reassured me that he was fine. Of course, I understood him well enough to know that he could be lying in order to keep me from worrying. "I'm fine, really, I'm fine. I just can't see through all this blood." As he wiped the blood from his forehead, I could see the cut, which continued to bleed profusely. "Jim, it looks really deep. You may need stitches." No, we just have to get off the boat. Besides, there's no one here to stitch me up, unless you want to give it a try." "Not funny, Jim. Are you sure you're all right?" Yes. Okay, let's try it again. Hoist up the motor with the winch, and we'll wait for another opening." The next attempt worked. A swell lifted the dinghy while I gently let the motor down onto it. Jim held it in place as he affixed it to the mount. After he attached the outboard onto the dinghy, Jim came back onto Sonio. He went below to what used to be the captain's cabin in order to search for our foul weather gear. It was just where he had left it, hanging in the shower compartment. He instructed me to put mine on. "The reefs are pretty sharp. If we capsize, these will keep us warm and protect us from getting slashed on the coral." "Honestly, Jim, they're coated with algae and slime. They smell disgusting." We're going to need the protection, Mario. We don't know how long we'll be out there." "Yeah, I know. You're right. It just sucks. Like everything else we've gone through in the last 24 hours. Make sure you put on some dry pants underneath. They'll help keep you warm and add another layer of protection." All I was wearing up to that point were swim trunks and a t-shirt. The only dry pants I could find were Captain Bob's khakis, and his waist was at least 46 inches compared to my 30. If our situation weren't so dire, it would have been comical. I folded the extra 16 inches around my waist and held it in place while I carefully slid the foul weather gear over the pants. The gear was dank and scummy. The bottoms had 4 months of salt water muck on them, and the putrid odor made my stomach turn. Sliding my arms and legs into the cold, slimy rubber was disgusting. I lay on my back on the bunk to put my boots on, and they slipped right on because they were coated with viscous goo. I knew this was the right thing to do to protect us from further harm, but my stomach was turning as I zipped up my jacket. It was all so absurd. I just couldn't believe that this was happening again. With the outboard ready to go, and all of our essential gear in plastic garbage bags, Jim and I took our final leave of Sonio. Jim hopped into the dinghy first. and tried to hold it steady for me. He was always looking out for me, trying to take care of me, making sure that I always had everything I needed. That has never changed, and none of that was lost on me. I looked at him and nodded, then jumped into the boat. As Jim held the dinghy in place, his fingers were partially submerged in the water. Ouch, what the hell was that? What happened? I asked. Something bit me. Look, my fingers are bleeding. Great, do they have piranhas here too? I joked ironically. We were getting punchy and laughed a bit. Jim told me to cut the lines to free us from the boat. I took out the utility knife and sliced away at the only line holding us in. With the rocking of the boat and the waves slamming us together, I had trouble keeping hold of the rope. It kept slipping out of my grasp. I caught a hold of it once again. I cut and cut, but it just wouldn't slice through. Jim said, sure, when you want them to cut, they're strong as hell, but when you need them to be strong, they snap. I finally cut through the line, and we swiftly drifted away. Jim engaged the outboard motor and headed parallel to the shoreline in search of a harbor. It felt as if we were finally free as we looked back at Sonyo. She had almost killed us for the second time. It seemed as if the boat was cursed. I know that sounds superstitious or just plain crazy, but there was a dark energy surrounding her. Jean-Pierre felt it as well. He called her the devil boat. So I was glad to get away from her and leave all that pain behind us. I just wanted to get to dry land and go back home. Our relief of being free from the evil aura of Sonyo did not last for long. The reality of our situation was beginning to hit us. Dinghies are not meant to be in high seas because they can easily flip over. Jim sat with his hand on the motor, keeping watch on what was in front of us. And I faced him from the bow of the dinghy and watched what was coming from behind. The waves poured into the boat, but I was ready with a bucket to bail water. At times it seemed like a never-ending battle, but it kept me busy. I didn't have time to worry about our safety. We had to do whatever was needed to get to shore. We were both very alert, and we seemed to be dodging the huge breaks in the waves pretty well. Where are we headed, Jim? I really don't know. I figured that if we head down the coast, there will be a port somewhere. Who knew we would need the GPS more than Jean-Pierre, I grumbled. At least he had a real powerboat with huge engines. I'm sure he's working on getting someone out here to rescue us, Jim said. Well, I hope they get here soon. I knew that we couldn't go straight into shore because the Devil's Backbone, the huge coral reef, stretched for miles along the coastline. After a bit of motoring, Jim noticed a microwave tower in the far distance, and we hoped that there would be a harbor or an inlet there. With a definite destination in view, we aimed for the tower. We were silent as we motored along the coastline. We were both scared and wondered what would happen next. However, there was no room for addressing our fears. We had to forge ahead. I'm not sure how long we were motoring, but it seemed like hours. The swells created 20-foot walls rising all around us. We could see land so clearly when we were at the crest of a wave, but the valley between them was ominous. Walls of blue-gray ocean seemed to push inwards towards us. I was claustrophobic being surrounded by the sea, hoping that none of the waves would break and come tumbling down on us. We forged on as the sun got lower in the sky. When we reached the microwave tower, we realized that it was further inland than it had appeared. We were both deflated. There was no port in sight. Jim looked at me and said, "Okay, so there's no harbor here, but this is the part of the island that is populated. There are a lot of houses right along the shoreline." I looked at him. "What are you suggesting, Jim? That we should head out to shore right here?" "I don't know. I don't know how much fuel we have left, and I don't want to be stranded out here without power." I nodded. "It looks like we're losing daylight, too. Do you recall from the maps if we're even close to a harbor?" "No, I don't. It may literally be a shot in the dark. What do you think we should do, Mario?" "Well, at least there are houses here." Most of the island is uninhabited, right? If we wait too long, we might be stranded with no fuel and no one to help us. Where the hell is the Coast Guard? It's been hours since we sent the SOS signal. I don't know, but you're right. Maybe we should try to cross the reef here. At least someone might see us and send for help. Jim, do you think we can survive crossing the Devil's Backbone? We have to, Mario. We will. I know we will, he said with determination. We looked out at the reef that stretched for miles in either direction. The waves were crashing down upon it with force. Beyond the area of turbulence, we saw calmer waters that were just inside the reef. There were beautiful white sand beaches with homes looking out over the ocean. We knew what we had to do, so we silently switched course, keeping our eyes fixed upon the gathering surge around us. We dodged numerous waves as we headed towards the shore, but the reef was still ahead. The color of the water began to change from deep blue to crystal clear aquamarine. We were heading into shallow waters. It was almost as if we were tiptoeing over the angry waves, hoping not to be noticed. As we got closer to the Devil's Backbone, the churning waters became more and more violent. Waves were crashing onto each other with greater force. It looked like we were in whitewater rafting route as we were tossed and pushed and pulled into different directions. The sound was thundering all around us, and we had to shout to be heard. We made it to the Devil's Backbone, and now it was time to cross over. But so Jim, he commented right before people got here that picture was awfully out of focus. And I said, well, look what was happening there. So let me go back to the beginning, and then I'll be able to give you a little blow by blow, if you will. All right, so this is when we're in Norfolk, Virginia. This is the day before we're heading across the ocean. The route was to Bermuda first, and then down to St. Thomas from Bermuda. So Jim, ever being Felix Unger, and had to be scrubbing everything down. And so that was him. We had beautiful weather that day. It was gorgeous. So we thought the rest would be as well, right? It was cold, though, yeah. This was November 9th? Yeah, November 9th, 2001. This is our friend Cheryl. Cheryl and Mark are in the book as well. Cheryl and Mark were the ones who got us really interested in sailing, and we went on several sailing adventures together. And they came to christen the boat with champagne, except the bottle wouldn't break over its bow. So look at Jim with Comet in his hand. It couldn't be more typical of him. And this is our friend Mark. So this is the night before. They had come the night before just to see us off. This is us having a nice bottle of wine. And this was charting our course. So we had planned every little bit, how far we would get. We were supposed to get to Bermuda in 4.5 days or 3.5? 3.5 days, all right. So, and I with my Bugs Bunny hat. I was always very serious. So I think this is the morning that we're leaving, all right? And this is the morning we're leaving. So there's Jim being very serious as we're about to sail. The other two people I cut off because, I talk about them in the book, and I want to respect their privacy. So, and there is our maiden voyage. It looked beautiful. Norfolk, Virginia. It was crisp and cold. And you don't know how cold it is until you feel the sea air blowing at you. Mark, a lot of these pictures, some of these pictures I haven't seen at all because Cheryl took them before we took off. So she took this from shore. She never showed them to us because obviously we had a shipwreck. So she didn't want to remind us. And when I wrote the book, she sent them to me. So this was as the weather started getting rough. The tiny ship was tossed. So, and then it started getting worse. And they started getting more out of focus. There's Jim. And then the waves get bigger, and we're tossed. And then this was the day we finally spotted land. This was the day we spotted Bermuda. It had been horrible weather for probably, let's see, it took us 9 days to get there, right? 8 full days of really horrid weather, lots of squalls and storms that just kicked up. And every time we called, the captain, we had a satellite phone, and he would call his wife, which was very high tech, on the satellite phone, and she would go on the government website to tell us what the weather was going to be. Without fail, it was going to be favorable winds and calm seas. The winds were right at our nose, so we could. They were on the nose. Yeah, totally, the entire way. Even here, when we finally spotted Bermuda, we were so anxious to get off the boat, right? We couldn't head straight towards it. We were trying to preserve fuel because we didn't know. We had motor sailed the whole way because it was the only way to go. And we needed to have enough fuel to get into the harbor, once we got into the harbor, to motor into our slip. So we sailed for the first time, really sailed for the first time on the 9th day, tacking back and forth. And it took us 8.5 hours to get there. And I don't know how long. It was in sight, yeah, it was in sight. I mean, it should have taken us maybe 2 hours, maybe 2.5. So Jim in his very happy mood. And there's us actually happy because it's right there. It's right there. So we're really happy. And then this was actually motoring into the harbor. And it was really, the colors were absolutely stunning. And of course, we're all pretty tired, except Jim. He looks really spry right there. And again, he's very happy. And here's sunset as we're heading into the harbor. We just couldn't believe it at this point. We really couldn't. It was like we're finally going to be on land. And then as we got closer to the slip, everything glowed with an amber light. It was absolutely stunning. And as we got further in, the water was pure glass, and all you could see was the reflection of the orange buildings, and it was absolutely stunning. It was probably one of the most beautiful sights. And this is us the next day, a little tired, but having showered the most.
After the first shower back on land.
That first shower was the best shower.
It's like taking off your ski boots.
Oh, yes. You know, and after not being able to shower for 9 days, we needed it, let me tell you. And it was a coin-operated shower. I had never seen anything like that. But on the islands, you know, water is at a premium. So, and I think that's it. That's the last one. So, does anybody have any questions about the journey or anything, the writing process, or, you know, what my birthday is, you know, what I most like? What?
Is this going to be made into an Audible book?
Oh, yeah.
Funny you should ask that. Well, you know, I did get the microphone, and we have, at the school I teach at, we have a recording booth. And but I realized just preparing for this that it takes so long to read just a very short number of pages. You know, the first time I read through, I wanted to get a little bit more in there, and it took over 25 minutes. And our librarian told me, absolutely not. People will be bored in a second, you know. So, but yeah, I think I will. But what's interesting that even though I wrote these words, I would be tripping on my own words. So I had to slow down the pace so much, you know, just to kind of see ahead what was there. And there are some series of words or sequence of words that just don't work well when you're trying to speak, like white water rafting. You know, there were 2 R's, and it was just there's a lot of alliteration in there. So, but yeah, I'm going to give it a try. I'm definitely going to give it a try, and I want to be telling the story because I know the characters. So yeah.
Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah, you know, he asked I turned him down. Right, save him for the movie. Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah. He could play me. Yeah. Just pretend I have hair. Yeah. Yeah, like before the trip I had a full.
Pretend.
That's right. But yeah, it'll take hours and hours and hours. But I think it's something worth doing, so I think I'm going to do it. So.
How did you know you were done with the book?
That's a really good question. Done with the actual writing of it.
We're all like type A, wacko, retentive people that nothing's ever done. Or
Right.
enough. Like, how did you say, I can't do it anymore? It's
Okay.
gotta be done.
So, Mom. So anyway, how did I know I was done with the book? That's a really good question. So first of all, it took for Mama, listen to this. This is where I get it from. I never have a lack of words.
I can be your partner in this.
Okay. First of all, I started writing the book in 2013. There was no way I could do it. I mean, all of this happened in 2001 and through 2002. So it was a long time before I could actually make sense of it. And for years after it, I was, I kept searching for answers. Like, I still don't see why. I don't see a lesson here. We had a very happy life. Like, we almost died. Like, it took forever. And even like our friends, when we came back, kept asking us to tell the story. And when the two of us tell it together, it's very animated. I think what really prompted me was to write the book in the first place was that after 2013, I sat down to write it, and I just couldn't get through it. It still was too soon. Plus, I wasn't really a writer. I started at the beginning, and I started to tell the story from beginning to end, and that's not really how you write. And I discovered, actually, when I was doing my doctoral work, that you just have to write what's in your head, and then you go back and organize it later. And don't try to find just the perfect word. This is a long way around to the answer of your question, but finding the perfect word, that stops, and then you forget what you were thinking about. So write whatever comes to mind, even though it's pedantic or whatever, and get it all down there, and then later you can go back and look at it. But don't let the energy flow. It doesn't matter where it is in the book. And so I just started doing that. But what prompted me to do it was, did I tell it on your retreat? I did. So Helen was a student of mine over 10 years ago. And at the end of every year, we take the graduating senior class the week before graduation out to Sag Harbor. And it's basically a retreat about, looking back at your 4 years in high school and then launching into what the future is going to be. And one of the talks that's on the retreat, the one that I give, is called Turning Points. And obviously, this was a major turning point in my life. So I tell them just a small piece of it, because I don't want to scare them to death about the future. So a very small piece. And then each year I would tell it. So that was 11 years ago now. And I tell it every year. And at the end of, afterwards, the girls are always, you should write this down, you have to write the book, And the year, not this past year, but the year before, I finally decided, I had just finished my doctorate the year before, and I finally decided, I know how to do this now. And I just sat and I wrote all summer long. And in August, I thought I was done. So I sent it off. And part of the reason why I thought I was done was because I couldn't stand it anymore. Honestly, there are two reasons for that. One, I couldn't stand reading the horrific journey again and again. I couldn't stand looking back over decisions or choices I made that I had come to regret. Like those were actually even harder than the physical pain that I went through. I wanted it off my desk. Well, that was draft 1, and there were 6 others that came after that. So I wasn't really done when I thought I was done, right? So just like that, you just keep going back, and every time I read through it, I was like, oh, I hate that turn of phrase, and I change it. And then I would think of something else. Oh, this paragraph jumps to this, and in my mind, I know what happened in between, but the reader won't. So it took me a very, very long time to know I was done. And at a certain point, what I said to the woman who was editing for me at the final draft, it was a Sunday morning, and I just said to her, I said, I'm done being pregnant, I need to give birth. And because I really felt like it was a labor, the whole thing was a labor, even from the experience, and though I could never know the pain that a woman goes through with that, the metaphor worked for me, and I just said I just need to launch it, to use a sailing metaphor there. So, yeah.
So now how does it feel to read your words aloud?
Okay, that's a really good question, because as soon as I started practicing for this, I decided that I hated it. No, because I was like, oh God, I wrote this. Like I can read it and I'm fine, but reading out loud was more of a challenge, And I found that I would say it a little bit differently if I'm doing like spoken word. Like I suppose it's like writing a screenplay rather than a book, a novel. The dialogue becomes prime. Whereas in a book, a novel, the descriptions are really more important. So, which maybe that'll be the next thing I do, right? So, yeah.
And I know Jim hasn't read the book because he said he lived through it. But is that the first time you heard Mario read that section?
No,
So
actually.
he read it to you. Well, what did you think when you first heard him read that? Did it bring back for you as well?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. There was a lot of harrowing experiences.
Well, so tell them how you got to hear me read it.
Oh, we were driving down to Delaware, and so he read the book for 5 hours.
He was trapped. He was trapped. I was like, okay. Yeah, no, that was great. It was great for me. So, but even in reading that was the first draft. Okay, and so while I was reading it, I was like, oh, that's got to change. Oh, that's got to change. But the thing that was interesting was after having read that, Jim picked out some of my inaccuracies, because I took most of it from my journal, which I kept. Yeah, November 12th, 2001, Atlantic Ocean, and this was recovered from the boat. Wow. And so, you can see what happened to the pages. That's why, in general, when I write in my journal or anything important, I use ballpoint pen, because the pages that were completely in felt tip, they just went away. Wow, like that's a good example. There are no words there. So, but I took most of it from here. But he had written a very accurate just description of the first part of the journey. And he put in a lot of the technical details. Like he knew, things that I don't know, the stay and this, when the sail ripped, and I didn't know what those things were called. So he had a very lengthy report, basically, from which I took the details. So, so there's a lot accurate in there. But I can understand. Honestly, I give Jim a hard time for not having read the book, but I can understand. Because having had to do it 7 times, the first draft and then 6 more after that, I was like,
You relived it every time.
yeah, so. Yeah, all right, need to put it away. But I
Waking
will,
up every morning.
exactly. But I will say that having written it down when I gave that talk this spring to the seniors at Marymount, that it wasn't as hard. Like, I feel like I put it in its place in my life. You know, not to say that I don't have bad memories about that, but it was different for me. Every time I'd get to the point right where I ended, what came after, my heart would beat really fast, and I would still feel the terror. But I don't any longer, which is good. I only feel terror when I see him come home from work. Any other questions? Yeah. I am working on 2 more books. One I finished the second draft of, and it's out to my friend Eileen, who edited and proofed this one. And it's going to take a while. It probably won't come out until early June. But that one's called Forbidden Kiss. This one is fiction, but they say write what you know. So I base it on a college-age boy who comes from an Italian Catholic family, right? So, but who's coming to terms with the fact that he's gay, and he has no idea, like he never even conceives of it until he kisses his first boy, and then everything is like he's thrown into all sorts of struggle and cognitive dissonance, and but I pair that with somebody from 1979 to somebody in 2018 who's in their 50s and is an ordained bishop who happens to meet somebody from his past, and then it's, you don't know what's going to happen. So that's one. And the other one that's going to take a little bit longer is about this woman here and my father, my mom and dad. They courted without ever having met each other. My father saw a picture of her that his brother sent from Italy to New York City. He was living in New York City probably at that point, probably 3 years, because you wrote letters for 2, correct? And so kind of recognized her, but thought she was really cute. He writes his brother back. It was his brother's engagement picture. So my uncle married her cousin. So my father wrote to her cousin and said, "Hi, my new sister-in-law. Can you tell me what that girl's name is? And can you ask her if I can write to her?" And she said, "Absolutely not. I don't know this guy. Like, what's up with that?" But long story short, which is her line, she, the last 2 summers, she's been reading the letters out loud to me, and I've been transcribing them. And it's going to be called Letters from Italy, and it's going to be about that whole courtship and the
letters.
right, their letters and then their lives, and then eventually moving to New York City. So, but that's going to take a little while. You have a lot more work to do with me.
Do you still write a journal every day?
I don't. You know what's interesting? When I stopped was when I started at Marymount.
Girls will do that to you.
Well, you know, it's an amazing. Well, you know, you work in an independent school too, right? And you're a teacher. Like, there's just something about the hours are much longer than ever before, and you're doing a ton of writing, whereas I never used to have to do that. Like you didn't write reports for grades. You know, you picked a comment, a pre-made comment from a list, and you checked it off, and it was very easy. This is so I just didn't have time, and it's funny, after I finished the book, I bought a journal. It's still sitting there. I wrote 3 times in it, and it's sitting there. And
You feel guilty.
it does make me feel guilty because I leave it on a countertop. So as soon as I go up the stairs to the bedroom, it's right there. I have to turn and look at it every single time. So I want to do that because my life is very rich right now, and I'd like to, and I realize how much you forget by reading this. Like, I had forgotten so many details. So, anyway, any other questions? Awesome. So, great. Thank you. All right. Thank you. Well, if you have a book and you want it signed, I'm going to sit over here, and if you want to get one, I'll be over here as well. So, thank you. Thank you.